And you're looking at live photos from Paris. So with so much focus on the attacks in that city this week, talk in the country and frankly around the globe shifts to how nations can protect themselves against terror. It's a subject that always seems to intersect with the law. And for that angle, let's bring in our legal panel. Jim Koussouris, he's a criminal defense attorney in Manhattan, sitting on the board of directors of the New York City Criminal Bar Association, frequently lecturing at New York Law School and the bar associations in Queens and New York City. And yes, he has glasses, you saw that. Doug Von Oist.
And a sweater, professorial sweater,
very
cardigan.
Doug Von Oist, a founding partner of Carson Von Oist, focusing on corporate misconduct, selected by the Legal 500 as one of the most influential trial lawyers in the nation. We're graced by his presence. Mayo Bartlett, an attorney at the law offices of Mayo Bartlett PLLC and former chief of the Bias Crimes Unit at the Westchester County DA's office, and happy I'm no longer asking questions about his former boss. And we're also joined by Mark Furness, who graces us with his presence this week.
He's without a sweater.
Exactly. And without even a tie. A professor at Brooklyn Law, and he's argued before the U.S. Supreme Court. So first up, guys, the debate over Syrian refugees. Now, earlier we heard from the president, we heard from Ted Cruz, we heard from Congressman Crowley and others over the push to block or delay Syrian refugees from coming stateside. Now, you have dozens of governors, in fact, I think it's up to 26 right now, that are looking to block refugees from their states. We also had the arrest today of those 5 Syrians headed to the U.S. with fake passports. They were taken up in Honduras. I've heard all the language, and I'll go here counterclockwise, I guess, or I guess clockwise, Jimmy, that it's just not the right time. You can't take the folks. But as you heard from the congressman, I think there's a perception that somebody raises their hand and says, I want to be a refugee, let me in. And the next week, you know, they're sitting with their feet up at Mickey D's in the States. It's an 18 to 24-month process. It's not like anybody asks, they're here, and it's not like we're taking 1 million like Germany. We're taking, all told, over a protracted period of time, 65,000 people, including a lot of women and children. You probably divine where I'm coming down on this, but first off, states don't get to make up their own mind, right?
Right.
By law.
By law, they don't. I mean, they have some power over funding and so on and so forth, but no, you're right. They don't have the power to just say, we're not going to take them. I mean, look, it's obviously phobia that has come back into focus after the happenings in Paris, after we have evidence that one of the people, at least, that was involved in the terrorist attack was somebody posing as a Syrian refugee. But you're absolutely right. As long as the security measures are fulfilled, you're talking about an 18 to 24-month process. As long as these people are properly vetted, we have confidence in our system.
Yeah, but how are you going to do that? I agree with you. I mean, this is a nation of immigrants. As a son of somebody who was born in Germany in the 30s, a Jewish person born in Germany in the 30s, I'm acutely attuned to the refugee problem. I get it. It's not the same situation, but I get it. How in the world are we going to, I mean, these people will have to be, welcome them with open arms, but they have to be bulletproof. They have to be absolutely airtight because the risks are too great. How are you going to have the funding to do the immigration equivalent of a proctology exam on each of these people to make yourself 98.9% sure that they're airtight? It's too many.
Yeah, but think about all the people that come in that aren't vetted that way because they're not Syrian refugees. I mean, there's no question that
well, they have to be vetted higher because they are Syrian refugees, and with the ease with which terrorists can penetrate
I see you shaking your hand, Mayo, and I happen to intrinsically agree with you, but practically, if one comes in, one, even if vetted properly, and then does an act of terror against this country on American soil, just think about the consequences of it.
Well, I look at it this way.
You could argue you could decide an election.
You have people, you have the young man in South Carolina who went into the church and shot all the people. We didn't start profiling everybody who looked like him. You have Timothy McVeigh, blew up the Oklahoma City Mirror building, killed all those people. Tremendous number of individuals. We have terrorism all the time.
They're going to argue, Mayo, this is different because you're forewarned.
They're not lone wolves. They're lone wolves. They're lone wolves because we deem them lone wolves.
But they are.
And the reality is that the people that perpetrated these events in Paris are not from Syria. They're French. So somehow somebody
they're
found
operatives for
somehow
ISIS.
somebody found a passport which now is discredited, which gives you the whole question about, well, how did that end up there? Is there a concerted effort possibly to make it tied to Syria, as we did with Iraq, which we later learned was not involved in 9/11 at all, so that we can continue to bomb? And now you have NATO, where it is a mutual defense pact, and now you have the entire world bombing Syria. Before Assad and the Arab Spring, no one even thought of Syria as being a credible threat to
Yeah,
any
but it's not
industrialized
Syria.
nation.
This is a
Doug.
nation, a
Take
terrorist
the
nation
lot
state
of it
now.
all
It's totally
together.
different.
Do you want, should we open our doors to tens of thousands of Syrians, given what we've been seeing playing out right now?
Well, I think the United States has done that since the beginning of the United States. That's what we do. There's a separate question of whether we do it, in a way that assures the safety of the people that live here. Unfortunately, when you have really bad events,
Listen, that's not what we
driving-
did in World War II. I mean, we did not take Jewish refugees in. 2 countries in the world took Jewish refugees in, and those people were entirely innocent. And we interned
listen.
Japanese people in the Korematsu case.
well,
I mean,
the
we put them in
Korematsu case
concentration
is
camps.
a
So we
disgrace.
have, I understand that, but this is a different deal. This is a terrorist nation state, and identify a cluster. These people are state-sponsored agents of terrorism. It's a
However,
totally
there's
different
one
world.
point that we get into, though, guys, and unfortunately I want to get into so much. We have elected officials saying, Muslims, sorry, go stay in the Middle East. Christians, you're okay.
Well, they're
And-
not
and-
letting them in. They're
and
not
they did-
prioritizing
No,
the
but Ted
Christian
Cruz
refugees.
says, let's prioritize
We
the
should.
Christians.
We should.
and
As a
Jeb
Christian,
Bush-
that's ridiculous.
They're subject to slaughter and genocide.
And Jeb Bush said that you'll know who a Christian is because if you're a real Christian, you can prove it. Now, how are you going to do that?
Listen, the
I
Coptic
struggle every
Christians in
day.
Egypt have been getting slaughtered for years and years and years. If anybody deserves refugee status of this group,
I know
it's
that,
the
but
Christians
just
in the first
imagine, Mark,
instance.
I hear you, and you're right. But imagine you're that family who's had to flee Damascus here. Okay, you got nowhere to go. You got kids in your arms, all right? And they say you got the wrong faith. You can't come to America. That's not. Think about what the whole
can't
country
be
is
that
based on.
way. It can't
America
be
is
that
based on
We have
religious
to
freedom.
listen. There were quotas in World War II.
All right, I
It's
want to
done.
get. I want to
Well, they
get to
did the same
encryption,
thing in
guys.
Germany.
Here, I want to get to encryption
did it
because
all
we've
around
talked
the
about
world,
this issue before,
including in this
and there's a
country.
debate over it. And online communications programs like SureSpot and KIK or K1K allow people, regular citizens for that matter, and terror suspects to encrypt their communications. It's like a secret code for web chatter. Only people with the code's key or people who break the code can read those messages. And again, law enforcement officials here, they want greater access to those keys, and providers are so far saying no. And I got to tell you, I got to tell you from my end, Doug, it was pretty illuminating who was voicing these concerns. It wasn't just from Republican administration. You have FBI, CIA, everybody else saying, let's have this debate. Let's get it all on the table right now. We played the bite from Comey, who said, we're looking at a haystack this big in America trying to find needles, and now we're trying to do it in the dark. And he said, as much as there's a hue and cry because of what Snowden said, no one ever proved that we actually went after individuals' personal information through these programs. We're supposed to protect Americans. We can't do it this way. Is he right?
No, I think he's completely wrong, quite frankly. I understand their frustration, but they also have all these tools where they can track a phone, they can track people around. These tools never existed before. They have a whole bunch of new tools. Now
And they're trying to
actually,
do metadata, they're saying, and they're trying to do mass gathering. They need these programs here from a time standpoint.
but you know, Rich, also people have a right to privacy. It's not only the government. We're not looking at the facts only in a scenario where you're looking at trying to track terrorists. People have a right to know that their phones are secure, their information is secure from other people too.
But don't you have to prove to that point, Doug? Listen, I've agreed. I'm starting to do a second thought, and this is why. I know what Snowden put out there. And from a gathering standpoint, he was right. It was illuminating in 2013 what we found out about just how far-reaching it was. But the second part of that we never got into, which was, okay, they're collecting all that, but show me the abuse. I know that means I'm giving the government the benefit of the doubt. But if we can't show abuse, and there is a consequence, let's assume for this conversation that it is compromising what we can and can't do to search the bad guys.
Well,
Rich,
isn't that
Rich,
a trade-off worth having?
Senator Wyden asked Clapper, the head of all the, he asked him, are you doing this? And he said no.
Right.
how can you show abuse if they're not going to be honest that it's being done?
Listen, here's the thing. Before you get to abuse, you have to determine whether anything unconstitutional is being done. To date, there is one judge in the United States of America, Judge Leon, in Washington, D.C., who held that this was unconstitutional. That order, for the second time, is now on hold by the appeals court in Washington, D.C. I think it's perfectly constitutional for the following reasons. They're collecting two types of stuff. The PRISM program that connects the websites we surf to, it's the third-party doctrine. Your ISP, your internet service provider, already knows what websites you're visiting. They're not collecting any, they're not wiretapping you, they're not bugging who you call, the content of your communications. They only know the numbers that you're communicating with, and if they want to go further, then they have to get a warrant. That has traditionally been allowed without a warrant. Pen registers do it all the time. You don't need probable cause for that. So I forget abuse. I think it's perfectly constitutional, and I always have.
I'm with you. You know where I've always stood on this. But you know something? If you look at these attacks, if you look at what's being done, you can't let it get away from you. There's got to be a way. What they're doing now is they're targeting, not the political areas. They're not targeting the buildings. They're targeting, Times Square. They're targeting Fifth Avenue. They're targeting places where, it's almost impossible to know where they're going and what they're doing unless you can enhance your ability to listen.
Their argument is, and Mayo, I know that you and Doug are on lockstep on this one, okay? But their argument is, if we're not going into the personal emails, but we can at least use metadata to be able to see where they're surfing. If somebody's going to if somebody's surfing an ISIS sympathetic website, right, and how to build a bomb or whatever else, and there's certain markers that conflate. I'm okay with that. If you're not going, if you are just gathering, but you're not going through it, isn't that a distinction with the difference?
No, and again, to Doug's point, they can't be trusted. Clapper basically gave false statements to Congress. Anybody else does that, they're going to get charged.
But we found out that
we shouldn't have to find out. It's like if your children, it's as if a child, tells you, trust me, and you know they lied to you. You're not going to trust them again. But the bigger question is this.
By the way, my kid did that with candy at 6 cavities today.
But to me, the terrorists have won. And what we ought to do right now is just get rid of the Constitution, give up all your rights, and then you can sit around and try to build it.
Isn't that an exaggeration?
Isn't
that an exaggeration?
No, it's not an exaggeration. I'll tell you why.
We're not talking about listening to conversations. We're not
because if someone is serious about attacking you, the real professionals, they're not using a cell phone.
But they're not all real professionals.
Well, the ones who aren't real professionals.
But that's a different question, Mayo. It might not be effective, but it's constitutional.
Anyone who's serious about harming you does not need to use a cell phone. They can simply meet.
But we're in the United States, and when you're in France, and you don't have to go anywhere, and you can do face-to-face.
Okay,
the last incident
in France was stopped based upon a simple wiretap. I want to get this last one here before I run out of time. Because we've talked about encryption. We've also talked about...
we haven't really talked about the encryption. That's a different question.
Yes, thank you, Mark. But I also want to get to a subject that I was going to start with you. I might go around the table now, but it has to do in the aftermath of those attacks. What more could be on the books in addition to surveillance to make things more difficult? Well, French President Hollande, he is asking for expanded powers to combat terrorism, and some of them are common sense, like making it easier for police to shut down buildings or limit people's movements during crises. But other proposals, they're causing some civil rights worries, like, for example, use of software that'll study surveillance feeds and use body temperature and breathing patterns for signs of abnormal behavior. France and UK, they're also both considering the bulk collection of internet usage data, which we just spoke about, so the government could see what sites a person has been to, but not what they did or said on those sites. And other nations have different proposals. Like Australia, they want to be able to have enhanced monitoring of suspects who have not yet been charged, including suspects as young as 14. Another proposal, they'd let a government detain a suspect for up to 28 days without formal charges. Israel already has laws in the books that lets suspects to be detained even longer without any formal charge or trial. And this is a subject that I thought about, and maybe apropos here. Germany, especially post-World War II, has strict speech restrictions in place, banning, for example, discussion and showing any symbols connected to the era of Nazi rule. Now, we all know here, Mark, that if you go to the streets of London, and I don't know about now in Paris, but certainly before that, out in the public with a bullhorn, you could have somebody preaching the benefits of ISIS, the call for Sharia law, and the downfall of Western civilization.
But
now,
you
we all
can't
believe,
defame somebody in a newspaper there,
okay,
which
hold
is,
on.
which is
Don't
paradoxical.
stay on track with me. Okay, so my point is this. If you can make it, should we go down the road in this country to say, well, why isn't it wrong that you can't be a vocal anti-Semite in this country? Or that you can be a vocal racist in this country?
We have enough problems around this table, 5 reasonably intelligent people, trying to determine whether the surveillance programs, PRISM and the bulk metadata and the telephone, is constitutional under our Constitution. We have a totally different constitutional system than these other countries. I don't think this discussion is
well,
on
you can't
point.
cry fire as it relates
That's
to
different
speech.
because it's not constitutionally protected because it's incitement. There's under our First Amendment, there's well-developed jurisprudential doctrines interpreting that stuff. These things don't fly in the United States because we're unique. Our constitutional system is unique and different from other
When do we
countries.
decide which hate groups you get arrested for? So if you try to join ISIS, you get a visit from the federal government. If you're a member of the KKK, you don't. You can run for office. So
Well,
at what point
why
do
don't
we not?
Why don't we? If you're going to join, why don't we
Because
expand
there's a
it to
First
say?
Amendment that has freedom of association. The difference
Well-
is when and that goes for ISIS, and it goes for the KKK, and it goes for the ACLU.
You don't have freedom of association with
can-
ISIS.
you
If you
can-
go
you
to a
can-
website and try to join ISIS, you're going to get arrested. You're going to get sentenced.
No, you're
That's
going to
what's
be
gonna happen.
surveilled.
Well,
And
and they're
you
going to
don't
say
have
that
to-
they're going to take the next step and say that you are a
Here's
combatant.
the thing.
That's what they're going to say.
There's a difference between association and action, and you can associate, but you don't have a right to engage in a conspiracy
being
to
a- but is
there
violate
anything
the
wrong?
laws of the
Being a
United
Is there
refugee from
anything
Syria doesn't
wrong?
mean you're conspiring anything. I don't think
but
they
a
wanted to be
refugee is
refugees.
not-
Yeah, but is
a
there
refugee
anything
is not a
wrong with
crime.
surveilling
No.
somebody you know is joining ISIS?
No.
Do you not want that?
Well, let's put it this way: if the person is joining ISIS and
Right.
they want to walk around, you want to follow them, follow them.
How
Should
about
you be able?
insinuating somebody in the mosque, which the Third Circuit
Should
said
you
is
be
no
able
good?
to? Should you be able to listen to all of their conversations, unless you have a belief that they're about to engage in a crime? No, because you happen to
I
know
couldn't
John
agree
Gotti
more.
doesn't
I
mean
couldn't
that
agree
you
more, but
or you
what's
hang out
wrong?
with them
But
doesn't mean
what's-
that you get your phone
How about
But
wired.
what's wrong with
insinuating a
just
human
seeing-
source into a mosque?
But
that's
what's
preaching
what's
hate?
wrong with just seeing what websites they're following and what they're doing without actually getting
But
into the
I
conversations
think
or the
the argument
communications?
is more
wrong.
we have constitutional rights.
Right.
If you are allowed to do that through police work, follow somebody in a car where they're going, that's
that's
perfectly
fine.
fine.
Right.
But all the arguments are going now towards encryption. You have a phone, you have to put a back door on the phone, you have to
Detention.
do. It's all things that, listen, you may trust this government, you may trust this president, this Congress, these courts, but if you change the Constitution in any way, you're trusting a group of people that are probably not even born yet to do the right thing 100 years in
How
the
about a
future.
raid without a warrant?
If
Well,
there's exigent circumstances and an emergency, you can do a
but if
raid
not,
without
Yeah,
a
but see,
warrant.
but what these governments are talking about is not having the exigent circumstances or any actual reasonable basis. So if one of you is someone I don't like, and I'm in a position to, I raid your house. I can do whatever I want.
I
And
vote
we
for
don't-
Mark.
we-
No, here's the thing, though.
We weren't supposed to tell
look,
them that.
They can get a warrant. The association is the association. If they allege in an ex parte a secret warrant to the judge that the other side doesn't see, that nobody sees, it's not subject to adversarial testing, that they're associating with people who are preaching imminent destruction, inciting imminent violence against the United States, they get a warrant and they bug the
As
phone.
far- as-
And if
as-
it's an
as- as
emergency,
a-
they do away with the warrant
as
if they can
people-
show that they're going to blow it up in the next week.
No,
What's
I'll
wrong
say
with
this.
that?
What's wrong with that is this. There are lots of bad warrants, lots of judges who don't
And then you move
question,
to suppress
who
it.
do not, the damage is done. You're already in
But
jail.
that's the true of
No.
every bad
No,
warrant.
well, that's my point. And if you already
So
have
then there
bad
should be
warrants
no
on simple
warranty.
things like drugs and you find out they're unreliable.
But Mayo, you're
confidential
making.
informants-
But Mayo, my only point is, you're making it as if there's no distinction between a post 9/11 world and a pre 9/11 world, and you're making it as if what's going on in Paris today would have made no difference if it was a month ago.
Well, what
Don't
happened-
circumstance ever dictate exigent circumstances?
You know what? And I'm going to misquote this, but they say, of course. But,
Do what I do,
But,
just
but if
bluff
you're
it.
willing,
Yeah.
if you're willing to
Make it
give
up.
up your liberty for security, you deserve neither.
If you're willing to give an ounce of security for
that's been the dynamic
freedom for
The beauty of the United States Constitution
It's not
is
true.
that it's timeless and that you don't change with the wind.
But the
because once you
Constitution
change it,
says,
we will
for
continue to
example,
debate this in the
you
break.
can suspend the habeas corpus writ in times of war.
I know this. They always get the last word on this side of the table. Okay, a quick update here, and this is a good one. The NYPD, remember that update I brought you? They're now discounting the reports of a new ISIS threat against New York City that I mentioned at the top, and that was coming from CNN. The department calling it an ISIS propaganda video. Good news. Meanwhile, we want to get you involved in our conversation, and here's tonight's online question. How much freedom are you willing to give up for greater security from terror? And which of the proposed laws we mentioned sound reasonable, and which ones sound to you like they go too far? Very interesting debate at the table here. Go over to our Facebook page and Twitter and send your opinions. All right, coming up next, from Paris to Albany. When's the last time we heard someone say that? The two most watched corruption cases in recent state history. Okay. Both of them continued today as the prosecution against Shelley Silver prepared to wrap, and the case against Dean Skells just getting started. Dominic will be live in Lower Manhattan, and we'll have analysis from the panel, both straight ahead.